All right, welcome back. We are Game 2004. That's Game Engines 2 and the winter 2026 semester at Georgian, and it's week 2, part 3 of our broadcast and recording. In the last part, we talked about kind of the model that I put together for you guys for last week. And every week, I want to give you guys a little bit of a lab or exercise. Again, I highly recommend you do it with me so that way you get practice, and hopefully it'll help you with your assignments and the stuff you're doing for your game. So what I want to talk about now is that deadly thing that we don't want to talk about too much, which is materials. And I know that not everybody is great at it. Here what I've done is I've copied my project. So I've made a clone of my week 1 into week 2, and I put it up on DevOps already. And this is where I'm going to share everything with you guys so you can see it, if you need to refer to the things that I'm doing. So I want to start talking about materials because although you may have been using them, you may not understand them still. Even though you've done some materials with Smiley, you guys did it with him, right? And all that kind of stuff. Yes? Some materials. Didn't you program it with C++? No? No materials Smiley at all? Just all shaders, that's it? Well, shaders got to have a material program somehow, so he probably had it there. It just probably wasn't apparent. So this is my project, and I'm going to use this level to start off as an example with just an area that I can do my materials. So what I want to do is, just for now, I want to add in a sphere that we can test with. So I want to test my materials and stuff with a sphere. So I'm going to go to Shapes, and I'm going to put in a sphere. There it is. And this sphere has a very basic material on it right now. But what we're going to do is I'm going to make it so that you can see a bunch of materials all in a row. And this is the first one. I'm going to use this one as an example. And so that we're good, actually, I'm just going to pull back here and maybe use another part of the level, like way over here, so that we can talk about it and not have any clash. I like the lighting right now that I'm getting. So it's behind me, the sun, right? And I'd rather do that so we can just look at the material itself. There we go. All right, so that's the object I'm going to use for the material. And I want to talk about what materials are. So if we think about it, what a material is, it's an asset. And what it does for us is it allows us to change the way a surface looks, and everything from the color of a surface to reflectivity, to even show how the light interacts with an object and that kind of stuff. Now again, this is really pulled off a lot of times by the shader code that is being used, that's underlying all this stuff, right? And you learn a little bit about shaders in Connor's class when you use Shader Toy and that kind of stuff. So what we want to do, of course, is use something called PBR, so physically based rendering materials, right? And those are what Unreal Engine uses. So PBR materials aren't always used by all game engines. For example, Unity, although it may use PBR materials, right, in its standard rendering, kind of pipeline, it may not use PBR materials. It may use basic materials. So actually what I think is the reason why Unreal Engine looks so great is because it uses a different material pipeline than Unity does out of the box. You can make Unity look great though. You can use PBR materials in Unity as well, but you have to do something to get it done. In Unreal Engine, it's out of the box. All right, so that's the way it works. So PBR materials, the reason why we use them, and they use a principled BSDF is what it's called, just like in Blender. So I'm just going to pull up Blender here locally. Hopefully it can actually work. Yeah. And it won't crash on me. Let's see. There we go. So even in Blender, the materials that you're using here, if I go to the material node here, it uses a principled BSDF. So that is a PBR type material. Okay? And these are the inputs for all of the material itself. And again, it kind of renders in a particular surface. Materials can have, a material itself can have more than one slot that you can use, that you can assign to a particular surface. Again, you don't have to just use one slot. That's one thing that you can notice as well. When I'm in Blender, and if I'm doing modeling, and if I'm not doing any rendering, I remove the light and the camera. I don't need those things right now. I'm not going to do any actual rendering in Blender. I'm just going to do modeling, so it kind of removes some of that noise that I'm going to do when I'm going to get when I'm using Blender. It doesn't matter if you're using Blender 4.2 or higher, right? So that's one thing to note. So again, materials, lighting, and exposure, it kind of creates this like photorealistic scene. It could be non-photorealistic as well if you want to make it that way. So what we want to do, again, is it uses a bunch of different things. And what I want to start thinking about when it comes to primary inputs is how we put together a material. There's 4 primary inputs that we're going to be using in material making, which is base color. So we start with base color, all right? And the base color, a lot of times, it could be a texture, it could be just a color that we use. And again, it's an RGB value between 0 and 1, okay? Usually for each color channel. That's what we kind of use. So of things to avoid is pure black and pure white. They don't really exist in real life. So if it's fully turned on or fully turned off, it doesn't look realistic. Use some other value, some smaller value, even 0.02 is okay. But not pure 0 or pure 1. Don't do that. Okay, that's kind of a way of talking about that. The base color texture is a flat, diffuse texture. That's what it is. So if I actually go back to the Blender from a Blender perspective and look at the texture, here's textures you can add in for a particular object. And if I have a material, right, it is a diffuse texture that we're using. Okay, so diffuse, it's on the base color channel, which is a diffuse channel by default. Again, the base color channel, you can choose different kinds of things for the channel. For example, you can add an image texture as an example, and other things as well, okay, in Blender. And it's kind of the same thing in Unreal Engine. A couple things that you want to try and not do is you don't want to do something skewed like this, okay? You want to do a color that looks like this for a material. Why? Because it'll align better and it'll wrap itself better around objects, okay? Let's talk about some other inputs. One of them is metallic, or also called metalness, okay? So, in other words, it talks about if your material is metal or not. That's the first thing. Is your material made of metal or not, okay? And if it is, then you want to add metalness. If it isn't, you turn that value low, as an example. You can still have material, even though it's not metallic, that has some metalness in it, because even the stone or concrete, you might see flecks of metal and other things in there, shiny stuff that's in your concrete, if you actually look at concrete. It's not a flat color necessarily, right? So you could add some of those things as well. Roughness is the other one. This is kind of one we use a lot, okay? So, and roughness values, again, what we want to try and do with roughness is define something that is less shiny. A lot of times what I do is, when I'm using these 4 inputs that we're going to see in a second, is metalness and roughness I use together to create, the variations that I want. Okay, that's what I use. But I leave specularity at 0.5, okay, a lot of times. Because specularity can really change the way the light reflects off an object. And so what I try and leave it at that, and then use metalness and roughness to adjust how shiny an object is and that kind of stuff. And you'll see how that works here in Unreal Engine. Okay? And that's what I kind of said. So specularity, it's a good habit to leave this value at about 0.5 and just use roughness and metalness, metallic, to kind of move things around and change how shiny an object is or not. One thing that you can do is you can use specularity to increase the glossiness of an object, how glossy it looks, as opposed to shining, right? That's what specularity does as well, right? It's a different kind of aspect of light, the way it bounces off. One thing that they talk about a lot is powers of 2. Always stick with powers of 2 for textures, and there's 2 reasons for that. One, the GPU likes powers of 2, okay? The GPU does not like, odd, weird numbers, right? So stick with powers of 2. It doesn't have to be square. The texture doesn't have to be that way. It could be something that's divisible by 2. For example, 16 by 128 is still power of 2, right? So it's okay. Let's make our material. So what I want to do first is I want to make a brand new material here in Unreal Engine. Let's do it together, guys. So I'm going to make a new folder called Materials. And I'm going to go inside my Materials folder. And what I want to do with it is I want to make a brand new material. The convention when we make a material is M. for material. So M underscore and the name of the material. I'm going to call this the test material, but we may change the name of that later. Once you've made our test material, make sure you save all to make sure you have all that in there. And what I want to do is I want to double click onto it to open up the material editor. Again, because I've just loaded this from the web, I'm going to change this so that it's main window and a couple of other changes. There we go. So when you go into the editor, and I have this in detail inside of the PowerPoint. I'm not going to read the PowerPoint here. I want to move along. So I want to talk about a couple pieces to this whole thing, right? There is the material editor itself. This is the viewport, right, as an example, for the material viewport itself. And then this is the preview. So what you have here is a preview. You can choose different shapes here. If you don't like a sphere, you can choose different shapes to show down here. That might make sense, right? That might make more sense for the kind of thing that you're affecting. You can also, if you click on there, you can also add in something like a mesh, a special mesh that you want to use as a preview mesh, as opposed to something that you want to use instead of this. So preview meshes are things that are connected to this thing, and you can do that as well. For now, I think a sphere makes sense because we're going to put it on our sphere, and you can see right now there is no material, none of these things are connected. On the left, one thing to know in the details panel is there is a material domain on the left-hand side. So this domain is the surface domain, but there's other options. For example, volume, post-process, and a bunch of other ones. User interface, if I was going to make a material for my user interfaces, that's something that I could choose. Okay. The other options are the blend mode. Do I want to make it only opaque, or do I want my material to be translucent? Or is it going to be additive? Like, for example, is my material, am I going to layer this material with other materials so that I can create another effect? So multiple colors kind of blended together, or multiple materials, different parts, you know, that kind of stuff. And you can use that blend mode as a modifier. The other one is how it's lit. So typical default lit is what you want to do. You might want to do subsurface scattering for things like water and glass and a bunch of other stuff like that as well. And you can choose some of these things depending on what you're making, whether you're making cloth or hair or an eye or whatever. It kind of, there's some presets here that you can create, and there's other ways you can make this so that you have your own preset you can create later on in an advanced way. You can choose if a material is two-sided or not. If you don't choose this, then the material is only single-sided, and the other side is culled. It's the back face. It's called back face culling, where we don't see the back of the material. It's used because what we want to do is we want to save computational cycles, right? If you're not showing the back face, why render it? And that's why a lot of times you'll see this, you know, back face is empty, because it takes too many computational cycles. But if you choose two-sided because you want to show the inside of a house or something like that, sometimes two-sided makes more sense. I always use cast ray trace shadows by default, but you can always turn this off if you have a performance issue, right? Because this does take more computation than you know, if you turn it off. For now, we'll leave it as normal. Couple of shortcut keys. Two things we use for materials. I want to use some kind of constant node, right? And there's two types of constant nodes, a vector constant and a single float type constant, all right? Here's how you do it. If you press the 3 key, so I'll press the 3 key here, and then left click, you will add in a constant node that is a 3 x and y z, a vector constant. That's what this is, okay? That's the 3 key. So again, 3 and then click, 3 and then click, 3 and then click. You can add as many of these nodes quickly as possible, and you don't have to search for them. The shortcut keys, guys, when it comes to material creation, are golden. You need to remember these things. The other one that I like to use a lot is the 1 key followed by left click. 1 and then left click, 1 and then left click. These are individual values, constants that are single values, floats, that you can attach to values here as well. Okay? So those are the three things, the two things that we've learned so far. There's other ones we're going to talk about as we go. For now, what I want to do is this value that I have here, notice that there is RGB, and then there's this one. This is a combined RGB value output, and you can just connect it to the base color. Okay? So right now it's black, right? And we're going to change this color. Let's make it another color other than black, right? So we can choose a color like maybe gray. You can drive the grayness of the color like this. right? There we go. And maybe a little darker than that, so something like this. There we go. Press OK. And so now you have a color that's driving, and you can see the preview is different than what it was before. Now remember, we want to cover those 4 values. We want to cover metallic, we want to cover specular, roughness, and metallic, roughness, and specular, and as well the regular color. So I have these nodes here, and these are just single nodes, like that are just constants. Again, I'm going to press the 1 key and press left click to create these nodes. And what I want to do is I want to put them in place. So I'm going to say, for now, my color is going to be 0 metallic. And I want to make it rough, so I want to turn the roughness right up to 1, right? And so I'm going to take this roughness value and put it right in here. So I'm going to say, from here, I'm going to go here. And then the specular value, again, is going to be 0.5, because I said that we should keep that at 0.5. So I'm going to put that in there as well. In order for me to make this take place, to make it effect, I want to go into Apply on the top left corner and click Save. Okay, so what this does is it applies the texture changes we just made to the basic node. This is the main node. That's what this is called. This thing here is the main node. The main node will change depending on what you choose over here on the left-hand side. Okay, so if there's some other things you choose here, like for example, if I chose translucent instead of opaque, take a look how the node will change. Some things get turned off. Okay, I'm going to put back opaque. Okay, so that's the basics of a material. Apply and save. And if I go back to here, there's 2 ways to apply the material to my sphere. I could go to the sphere itself, and on the right-hand side where it says basic shape material, I could pull this in from here and apply it this way. That's one way. The other way to do it is I could also drag and drop on top of the sphere in the viewport like this. And you can see that's what I've done here. So 2 ways to apply the material. Questions so far about materials, very basic things. So again, the 4 channels that we have that you want to take care of. And you can do a lot with those 4 channels, guys. Tons and tons, believe it or not. You can modify stuff a lot. So I'm just going to go back into all this stuff. It talks here in the PowerPoint. Again, this is your reference. It talks about what each one of these things does. There are some special things that it does. And it talks about the viewport and all that stuff. I've just kind of skipped by all that stuff to talk about right when I get to here. So adding basic nodes, and we talked about adding a basic node, and this is what I've got right here. We're at this point. By the way, notice that here I have a constant value of 0.5, 0.5, 0.5. That is gray, so if I went back to my material and take a look at the values I chose, almost there. You can always change these here as well too. You can say 0.5 here, change the color values right in here as opposed to using your color wheel, okay, if that makes more sense to you, right? A lot of times there's 2 ways you can match a color that I find that is really good. So this is one way. The other way to match a color is if you double click on the wheel, you can always use an eyedropper. So if there's something that you want to use that is a color you want, you can eyedrop tool, and then it can give you the color that you want, very specifically. The other way to do it here is there is a hexadecimal code here. So there's your hex RGB code. So if you like a color from the web, you can look at the specific color, and then you can just put it in the hex code in there, and it'll change your values for RGB to match whatever color you want, if there's a specific color you need, right? So please make sure that you understand those things, because it's really, really important that your color values are correct. Questions around basic nodes? Again, 2 different nodes. The kind of a vector node that we have here. This is kind of a vector constant, and these are just single constants. And these constants we want to expose later on when we make our material instance, and I'll show you how to do that. Next, once we have our materials, and I talk about a constant 3 vector, which is, again, it's there's other ones you can use as well. And it talks about here what I've kind of done to put things together for your roughness and that kind of thing. So now we have this material, and the material we created was really concrete. Here's a challenge for you guys. I'm going to pause the video here. I want you guys to try and attempt to create all of these materials on your own. All right? Using the image, I want you to make these 5 materials or 6 materials and add them next to your concrete material we just made inside of Unreal Engine. Okay? I want you to practice and try and do it by eye as much as possible. If you need to look it up, like if you want color values or whatever, you can try that, but I want you to attempt to make your own materials on your own. I want each of you to do it. Okay? There's no excuses here. You don't need your partner to do it for you, because you need to mess with the material at some point in your game dev life. So do it now. Give yourself a time and make this as close as possible as you can to the images that you see.